Go ahead and call the meeting of the Finance Committee to order. The first order of business is the budget outlook for fiscal year 2022. And Barb, I think we'll start with you on that.
Yep. Okay. Just give me a minute. I'll start. In a second. All right. We need to remember to share the screen here. Okay. Can everyone see that?
Yes.
Okay. So what Lydia and I really hope to do tonight is to give you all just sort of an idea of where we are in the budget process. There are a couple areas that we are hoping to get some guidance and direction from the committee this evening. So this is kind of where we're at. Lydia and I met with all the department heads. I think Lydia was back in January, I believe, to go over their operating and capital budget submissions. We're now in the process of following up on some issues that came up at the meetings. I'm getting some questions answered. So those discussions are still ongoing. Lydia is in the process of finalizing revenue projections for the most part. That is something she does on her own, but there are some areas that she works with, particularly the Director of Planning and the Director of Recreation and Parks. As the committee probably remembers, we hired Evergreen Solutions to work with us to kind of see how our salary structure was holding up since it's been 3 years, I guess, since they completed their work. And also to help us with recommendations to the committee for employee wage adjustments for FY 2022. Evergreen's work is ongoing, though it's very close to wrapping up. At this point, based on the data I've seen, I had a conversation with Evergreen as recently as this afternoon. It does appear that we will need to make some adjustments to our salary structure. What that looks like is not clear yet. We will have that recommendation for you by your next meeting. Obviously, part of the adjustments to employee wages depends on what we do with the salary structure. I did just want to mention to the committee that each 1% in wage adjustments has an associated cost across all funds of $100,000 plus. Because obviously every time we adjust wages, certain fringe benefits are tied to that, overtime costs are tied to that. So that's probably one of the kind of the biggest holes in the budget right now.
So Barb, that $100,000 figure includes benefits as well as the salaries?
It does. There's been a number of salary changes since last fiscal year, Council President Pecoraro. So I don't have an exact figure. We don't have our workers' comp rates, but it's a fairly good, solid figure running across all fringe benefits as well as overtime. Kind of a rough order of magnitude, but that's a good question.
All right, thanks.
So kind of wanted to start with some changes in staffing. I think some of which you're aware, some of which you may not be, that have happened since you adopted the budget a little over a year ago. After we adopted the FY 2021 budget, the Mayor and Common Council authorized the addition of another deputy chief position in the police department. Major Gibson started, as you may recall, in December. This was an unbudgeted position in the department. I think things will probably work out okay financially because they've had some vacancies in other areas, but that position was not budgeted for this fiscal year. Our longtime police custodian, Betty Ruby, who I think many of you have met, retired at the end of December of 2020. In the wake of her retirement, we had some internal discussions and we did move to a contractual cleaning service. So that position was not filled after Ms. Ruby's retirement. In police communications, as you all are aware, we've been working with the county to have them take over our overnight dispatching services for the police department. My understanding is all the necessary agreements have now been signed. The county has hired staff. And we expect them, the least last date I had from the chief is that it looks like they will be assuming overnight police dispatching services in just a matter of weeks, more or less around April 1st.
And the agreement, excuse me, and the agreement there is that we're going to make a contribution to the county on that for a year, is that right? Or
Right, it was just for FY 2021. I had some discussions with Roberta Wyndham, my counterpart at the county. Obviously, they needed to hire staff, and I think their staff was hired more or less around October 1st. They hired 2 people. They needed to be trained. So the agreement reads that we will pay them for the cost of those 2 positions for a maximum of 6 months. As Ms. Wyndham and I discussed, obviously,
right.
we understand their need to gear up, but we also don't want to be paying for staffing for too excessive of a period of time when we're not actually receiving the service. But that is a 1-year contribution. When Lydia started in mid-September, one of the things she and I talked about very early on was just how flat the organization in her department was. Basically, it's the director of finance, and then every other position in her department is at the same level, an accounting specialist. My concern, as I expressed to Lydia very early on, is that she not get too bogged down in the day-to-day details to the extent we can help her avoid that. Certainly that would allow her to focus on more strategic issues. Also, one of the things I know the mayor and common council have talked to me about during my 4+ years with the city is just trying to build capacity in each of the departments for succession planning. Lydia has advertised the position, I think, in hopes to have somebody on board soon. I think if you have any specific questions about how Lydia is going to divvy up duties, I'll let her answer that, but hopefully she'll have somebody on board soon. We're a service industry, so obviously personnel costs are a fairly significant component of our budget. Some pieces of our personnel cost for FY 2022 are locked down, others aren't. Our Director of Human Resources, Ms. McCullough, and I had a call with our Benecon rep, I believe it was last Wednesday or Thursday, and they were able to provide us our health insurance renewal rates, which is always helpful. We've had good experience, as you probably recall, from the Legit Health presentation at your meeting. I guess that was February 22nd. So we're looking at only a 1.5% increase in health insurance for FY 2022. Pension contribution rates, I think as the committee's aware, there's 2 different aspects of that through the state system. The first is kind of just referred to as the pension contribution rate. That's for our non-sworn staff. We will see a slight increase. Right now we're contributing 10.24% of salary for eligible employees. That's going to go to 10.57%. LEOPS is the system that is applicable to our sworn police staff. There's actually going to be a slight decrease, probably because they really jacked it up last year. It's going to go from 34.93% of salary to 34.21%. We will see no change in our life, short-term disability or long-term disability rates for FY 2022. We are still waiting for our dental rates, but that's not a significant expense. So even if it goes up a little bit, it's not going to be that material overall to the budget. Staffing changes.
Can I ask a question real quick?
Sure. Interrupt anytime, please.
You had mentioned in your previous slide about the workers' compensation rates, and I would encourage, so the experience mod factor that is applied to that overall rate is usually calculated 6 months in advance. If you haven't gotten that, you should have it, which would
I actually do have it, and it's on an upcoming slide. Yes, I'll share that with you. I thought particularly, Councilmember Yingling, that would be of interest to you, given your day job. So staffing, some of this I just indicated that you'll see from a budget to budget standpoint. You'll see, a full year of the additional deputy police chief position that was added mid-year. You'll see, kind of the total elimination of the police custodian position as part of the overnight dispatch switch to the county. We're going to be able to eliminate 1 communication specialist, 1 position in the police department budget. One of the items you talked about at great length during last year's budget process was trying to address the fitness center deficit. Part of that, as you may recall, is there were certain benefited positions that went away. One position that went away entirely, which was the Family Fitness Center manager position that was budgeted for a partial year. In FY 2021, it was actually scheduled for that person to leave as of January 1st. She actually chose to retire very early on. She left at the end of July of 2020, which certainly is going to help the fitness center bottom line this year because she left so much earlier than we had anticipated. As I just mentioned, Lydia is going to be hiring an accountant versus an accounting specialist position. And then Mr. Depot did inform me that our Main Street manager, Sandy Anderson, plans to retire in fiscal year 2022.
Oh,
Yeah, that's fairly new for me as well. I believe her planned retirement is more or less around August 1st, is my understanding. So Mr. Depot and I have had a conversation about kind of how could he use that FTE in a manner that's going to best benefit the department and the city. In talking to Mr. Depot, he would like to convert that position to a comprehensive planner 1. Both the Main Street manager and the comprehensive planner 1 are both pay grade 114 positions. So from a budgetary standpoint, it's neutral. In talking to Mr. Depot, there were kind of two aspects, I think most of you are aware, to the Main Street manager position. Certainly, first and foremost is the kind of business outreach, business communications aspect of her job. There's also some grant-related duties, specifically applying for community legacy grants, other state programs. She oversees our CDBG program. So what Mr. Depot and I have discussed is that his new planner would kind of perform the traditional Main Street manager duties. The grant-related duties that Ms. Anderson performs would be transferred to the special projects manager. That would basically free up some time beyond the Main Street duties for Mr. Depot to actually have some pure kind of planning support, hopefully getting applications more quickly through the process.
all right. I mean, I know it's essentially the same people, but maybe we can have some conversation about this when we have the Economic Development Committee meeting.
Certainly, yes, and Mark will be part of that discussion, and he can share with you a little bit more kind of how he sees that working. He and I have discussed that there's probably some new grant opportunities that perhaps we haven't explored in the past that we could sort of, with some additional staffing support, get ahead of the curve on. And I think also, what he and I talked a little bit about the grant portion, because certainly I think there's going to be aspects of that his staff needs to be involved in. Specifically, we've talked about perhaps applying for some streetscape grants for Main Street, things of that nature that certainly have a design element that his staff would certainly be more attuned to than our special projects manager, just by technical expertise. We have received some new staffing requests. You may recall we added a couple positions in FY 2021. So I think that kind of satisfied some of the need. We were not able in FY 2021 to fund all of those requests. So some of these are repeat positions. One is a desktop support technician in our technology services department. These are last year's numbers because obviously we don't know what the new pay structure is going to look like. So these are sort of good approximations. Annual salary, more or less. So this is more of an entry level position, kind of in the $47,000 to $50,000 range. Based on benefit cost, roughly it has an annual cost of about $80,000 a year. The streets department also asked for 1 to 2 additional equipment operators. You may recall we did add an equipment operator position in FY 2021. Approximate annual salary based once again on current salary structure is roughly $33,000. I think that number will probably slightly go up because I do see the minimums of the ranges increasing. Fully loaded cost per position is about $63,000. That's with benefits. So we have anywhere of a swing of roughly $63,000 to $126,000, depending on whether we would add 1 to 2 equipment operators. In preparation for your next meeting, I can certainly share with you some of the background materials that they gave to Lydia and myself. I think at this point, Lydia and I cannot sit here tonight and basically tell you whether there's even sufficient funding to add any new positions. I think there's just too much that's unknown, particularly with the Evergreen study piece. I certainly think, both departments probably have needs, but it's just a matter of whether we can pay for it or not. To Mr. Councilmember Yingling's comment, this is for workers' compensation. We should get our renewal rates in just a matter of a couple weeks. He noticed the experience mod, which is based on 3 years of losses. We did have a bad year that is dropping off. So I was just advised this week that our experience mod is decreasing from 2.01 to 1.56. The unknown, obviously, beyond the experience mod is sort of our salaries and staffing, which obviously has an impact. I think worst case scenario, our premium should be flat and hopefully it may even decrease from FY 2021 to 2022. So certainly I think, as we have more information, I'll share that with you. And Councilmember Yingling, knowing that this is your area of expertise, I can provide you with the claims experience if you'd like me to send that to you.
Just a comment.
Sure.
I don't necessarily need the claims experience, but being that we have a new director of HR, I believe that we bid this out not last year, but the year before. I can't remember.
Yeah,
To my Griff. I would like to maybe, if it might be not a bad idea to look at that again. I know there are limited options. I believe there was like key risk we looked at, which actually was more Griff. Certainly I think that there are probably areas that we can improve on by the brokerage services that are offering more services for the amount of pain, that can control losses better, have more communication with, even if it's legit, or not legit, I'm sorry, Chesapeake, who's our carrier, to manage the claims. When you have an agency that's involved in that, it could be beneficial, because some of these other agencies are offering that in-house, which my understanding is our current is not. So I kind of think that if Ray does have time, or at least I would strongly suggest the next finance committee look at that.
Okay. And I agree with you. We did have some discussions, as you noted, with brokers. I think we probably weren't as far enough ahead of the curve last year on that item. And then certainly the past 12 months has been a period of transition in HR fairly considerably. But I will mention that to her, as well as Brian DeMay, our safety and risk coordinator.
Yeah, I think it's a little too late now. But as I said, I'd strongly suggest the finance committee and, the next staff of next year.
I agree. Yeah, it's probably something that should get underway as soon as we get through the renewal in terms of the broker piece, because as you know, we have to have an agent of record. And if we don't do that soon enough, we get into the renewal and it becomes very unwieldy. So I'll mention that to both Ray and to Brian, make sure that's on their radar screen. I want to talk a little bit about property assessments and taxes. I think all of you as property owners in the city know that Westminster is reassessed all at one time. That happened in calendar year 2020. I'm sure all three members of the committee probably got your statements about your new values as of January 1st. In Maryland, if there is any increase in assessed value, that is phased in over 3 years. So for us, FY 2022 is the first year of the phase-in period for this latest round of reassessment. Our assessable real property base net from year to year is an increase of 2.67%. What that means in terms of revenue is an additional estimated $424,000. Of that, $333,000 goes to the general fund, and then $91,000 goes to the capital projects fund. Our current real property tax rate, I think as the committee knows, has been 56 cents per $100 of assessed valuation for some time. The constant yield tax rate calculation, which we've received, is set at 0.5454. Just as we always do, we always share with you all that each 1 cent on the tax rate generates just under $200,000 in additional real property tax revenue. I put as a question mark whether or not we're maintaining our current property tax rates. My assumption is that we are, but I did want to just confirm that with the committee this evening.
That's right.
Okay. Kind of touching on other general fund revenues, some of which are certain, some of which Lydia and I are still discussing. Property tax in the general fund is is more than 50% of our revenues, which is very common in most municipalities in Maryland. Another big revenue source is income tax revenue. Even under the best of circumstances, this is the revenue source that drives every city administrator and every finance director crazy trying to figure out what number to plug in. For FY 2021, you may recall that we did reduce this revenue source, kind of anticipating the impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic. We've had discussions internally. We also have received some guidance from the state, as well as Ted Zaleski, the very talented budget manager at the county, that people are across the state seeing kind of payment anomalies because of the pandemic, which is making it even more difficult to predict what this revenue source will generate in FY 2022. At this point, our thinking as a staff is that we will likely leave it flat, but we are still kind of working through those numbers. We will have a definitive answer and a recommendation for you by your next meeting. We have heard from the county about the town-county payment. The reason I said it's effectively no change is I think it's like a difference of like $1,000. So not material at all in terms of any change. Kind of switching to the expenditure side, and this is still in development, but just, I guess, some thoughts that staff has or wanted to call to your attention. I did have an email exchange with the mayor and the council president about including funding in the FY 2022 budget to have kind of a team building strategic planning retreat. We do have an election in May. We will have some new faces, and you also have a new city administrator. So my thought was to probably hold that sometime in the fall, late summer. I think it, probably fall, just to give you a chance to have the new city administrator on board and settled in. But I think it would be good just for the new elected body to sort of look at the strategic plan, make sure it still reflects their priorities, and certainly just have the opportunity to sort of, build some camaraderie in a team. You may recall that back in 2019, we hired the National Research Service to do a resident survey. The discussion at that time was that we would repeat that survey probably about every 3 years. So as of now, I have included some funding to repeat that survey, probably in the spring of 2022, just to keep it 3 years apart. Community planning and development, we've been carrying this project for a while. This is to hire a consultant to help with the zoning code update. Lydia and I did speak to Mr. Depot, and they have been doing work internally. This would be to help someone basically, kind of do the legalese part of it, help kind of organize some things. They're also looking at some updates to the sign code. So they just need some technical assistance, and Mr. Depot does believe this is something that he will definitely tackle in FY 2022. So that's funding that was actually in this year that's not going to be spent. We hired Partners for Economic Solutions, as you all know, to help us with Stocksdale. They'd gotten through almost completely through phase 1, or at least a good chunk of that, before the pandemic hit last year. At their recommendation, we did pause the study because certainly the economy was in a state of turmoil. We are including that funding to help them have them resume that work. Hopefully things will settle down. And Councilmember Yingling and I have discussed that we will hold another Economic Development Committee meeting in April. And I will be working with you all on dates. But they will then present their report to you all about the site and can kind of give you their assessment of the state of the economy and when you should get going again. Probably a month or more ago, you had a work session on the body-worn camera program and did authorize that to move forward in FY 2022. So there will be some funding in the police operating budget to get the camera program going. Did want to take the opportunity tonight just to have you all confirm kind of outside agency funding for at least my entire tenure with the city. We have given $250,000 a year to support the Westminster Volunteer Fire Department under a grant agreement. We have also given $5,000 a year to the municipal band. I think in preparing in the budget, my assumption is that the committee wants to continue that funding for FY 2022. But we did want to confirm that and not just assume that that was your wish.
I think that's right.
Okay. Kind of switching to the capital projects fund. This is where we account, as you know, for all the non-utility capital. As I mentioned earlier, we will see an increase from property taxes just because of reassessment of about $91,000. We have received some information from the state about highway user revenue, increase of approximately $47,000. Just as a reminder, highway user revenue, as the name would somewhat imply, can only be used for kind of road construction, maintenance, or in some jurisdictions who run transit systems, there's some opportunities there. But for us, it's primarily roads. We have assumed.
You say that's an increase over what we got last year?
Yeah, that's what they're telling us. So that's good news. We are assuming for revenue projection purposes that we will receive the Maryland Heritage Authority's Area Authorities grant for the Durbin House. We have applied for $100,000. It's a total of a $200,000 project. This would be to essentially seal the building envelope of the Durbin House for preservation purposes. I think everyone is aware we have 3 separate special benefit assessment fees. One is water, one is sewer, and there's the one we call special benefit assessment, which basically is kind of non-utility capital. We do look for opportunities to use the special benefit assessment monies. This year, as you may recall, we had purchased in streets a number of pieces of equipment to service the city as it's grown, primarily through Stonegate and Bolton Hill. Which was kind of a lifesaver. It does have to be tied to growth. This year, the street department would like to purchase about a new leaf vacuum. I think as the city has grown with the number of residential properties, they are finding at times that they don't have the necessary equipment to basically kind of get through their routes of leaf vacuuming as quickly. And talking to our street superintendent, Steve Strasburg, earlier this week, it did sound in my conversation with him like the purchase of the leaf vacuum is tied to residential growth in the city. So it does appear to qualify for the use of benefit assessment monies, which is helpful. Program Open Space, I think everyone's familiar with this program. It's a state program that basically passes funding down through the county. The way Carroll County has historically handled it, which probably leaves Westminster somewhat at a disadvantage, is they take the 8 municipalities, 4 have a turn each, in alternating years. They generally tend, not always according to Abby, but generally tend to split the funding equally between those 4 municipalities. Certainly given Westminster's much larger size and population, that leaves us somewhat at a disadvantage. We do have an FY 2019 award that has been unexpended. It has been tapped for Wakefield. It's recognized in this year's budget. It's just almost $86,000. Abby has been in touch with the county. It appears that the application cycle for FY 2022 funding is going to open up probably in May. So, barring anything unforeseen, such as one of the smaller municipalities having a really significant project, in those cases, sometimes we have been skipped, but generally they split it up 4 ways. So we don't know what that's going to look like. We believe the county is still waiting to hear from the state on exactly how much money they will receive in Program Open Space. Before Lydia and I sort of jump in, and I may need to just kind of change screens real quickly because we wanted to show you sort of what the CIP looks like, but this is the debt service schedule for the non-utility capital. And the reason I kind of wanted to show you this, because it does kind of become material, is so in FY 2022, we're going to have debt service of roughly $841,000. As you'll notice, by the time we get to FY 2023, the debt related to the garages drops off. We then kind of have a fairly constant number for 2024. For FY 2025, we see another drop, primarily because we're getting close to paying off the bridge debt issuance. And then by 2026, it drops. So in a matter of, just about over a 4-year period, we're going to basically see our debt cut in half, which I think will certainly help going forward in just funding the city's capital needs. But we do have a little bit of period of time to get there.
Not that we want to necessarily do that, but just out of curiosity. When we get to FY 2027, or FY 2026 for that matter, and all that, and it's the debt is basically cut down to almost about half. Does that give us? Do we then have how much additional capacity?
It's a good question.
Would that give us?
Yeah, it's a good question, and it depends how you define it. So Maryland, I was in Tacoma Park at the time, so this is going back, more than a decade or so. Basically requires municipalities to have a debt management policy, but it can be very generic, and ours, in fact, is. I sent out a copy of the Wye River study that Lydia's predecessor commissioned back in 2019. The difference between Westminster and, say, a Rockville is that we have not historically had our debt rated. We have obtained debt through the CDA, as you can kind of see. That's where all our debt has come from. And I think that's been a very good mechanism for the city. If you're a community like Rockville, which actually does go to the bond rating markets, the standards of kind of maintaining your AAA rating becomes much more significant, or your AA rating. We've got a little bit more flexibility because we're not rated, but Lydia and I, if you'd like, Council President Pecoraro at the next meeting can kind of maybe walk through briefly, it's not going to take much time, kind of that Wye River study. But certainly it depends what standard. If you're trying to mirror kind of A-rated debt, we would still have quite a bit of capacity. If we were looking at more, and I don't think the city wants to do this, sort of B-rated debt, which isn't quite junk, but it's certainly not high-rated debt, then you pick up capacity. I would suggest you probably look at more the A-rated debt standard, and Lydia and I can kind of walk through that report and kind of report back to you at your next meeting.
Okay, yeah, I just think that'd be helpful
Okay.
for us to have in mind. Like I said, not that we necessarily want to, hit that limit, but it would be interesting to know what that is.
Right, and I think, depending on what interest rates are, there are some when we get to the CIP itself, there's certainly some things I know you all have talked about in terms of future pool improvements, perhaps, that the city likely would not have the cash for.
Right.
So I think it certainly gives some opportunities to spread out the cost.
The other question I have is, and I don't know, I mean, with some of these dropping off and some of them, being a little longer term, with rates being where they are now, I think it's always worth asking,
right,
what the opportunity is to refinance anything.
We did, and Lydia and I were actually having, a discussion. So for most of the CDA issuances, so if the garage is going to drop off anyway. We did have a conversation with, what are we paying in interest? It's really not that much, so you probably don't want to do that. You may recall we had another issuance when I first started, and I can't recall what it was. But basically we started using excess cash and paying it down by $750,000 chunks because I think it was in the 5% range.
Right.
For the roads, basically almost all the roads is 20 years and pool is 20 years. The CDA standards require you typically that you cannot refund that debt or even pay it off early for 10 years. But we can go back and look at that. Certainly I don't recall what the interest rate is on the bridge debt, but it's coming, it's going to be paid off in a couple of years anyway. Right. But we can certainly share with you what the interest rates were as well.
Well, I'd like to say, I mean, I don't think it's even worth looking into the bridge because if you look at the amortization schedule, I mean, the amount we're paying interest is,
yeah,
very small. So
yeah, and even the interest on the the bridge isn't terrible, but that would be in the audit report. And I think it'd be something we can pull very easily for you.
Okay, thanks.
See if I can do one more share. So I'm going to kind of switch this one. This is the CIP, and I think Lydia, you can jump in. I think it would be fair to say it's in somewhat, to say it's in rough draft form, or at least in draft. I wouldn't say it's too rough. But this kind of gives you an idea of kind of the sheet Lydia is working on and sort of how we plug in numbers. So it's sort of the ugly piece beyond what you tend to see. One of the challenges that we have had, and Lydia certainly noticed it very quickly. Our CIP is a 6-year CIP. And certainly I think like any jurisdiction, the longer you go out into that 6-year period, the harder it is to predict if it's not an item that's recurring. But we had a number of projects that were submitted this year, kind of both sides of the coin. So we had certain projects that had never been, and Lydia, please correct me if I'm wrong, but had never been on the 6-year CIP, such as the police headquarters building generator, the city hall roof would be one example. And those, if you look at those two projects together, it's, almost $260,000. So I think President Pecoraro, this points to an issue that I think you had raised last year, which is how good a job are we doing in terms of our facilities and planning and having an idea of what's out there. We've also had sort of the flip side of that, which is, and that's why I will want you, as we walk through this, to kind of realize that this is in draft form. And I'll give you an example. Last year, what got turned in is we had storm drain related work every single year. This year, we didn't get a project sheet for it at all. So that's made it a little challenging for us this evening. We are working through those issues, fairly quickly. I think definitely by your next meeting, we hope to have the budget completely locked down. I think if Lydia had probably had 48 more hours, I think some of these question marks would have been cleared up. But that's why it's a little hard to tell you definitively how out of balance we are at this point, because we're still sort of trying to get some of this cleaned up. With the utility capital, she's also still working on that. Once again, this is sort of the ugly side of things. She's working with Mr. Glass and Mr. Rawlings, to sort of see where we are on the construction schedule for the ENR and the septic facility. And we're still just sort of working through some of those issues. So just wanted to kind of show you what's sort of up in the air and why we can't give you a super definitive answer, particularly on the utilities. I think this evening we would like to focus on the capital projects fund, because I think we have at least enough detail to try to have a discussion that's worthwhile with the committee about your priorities. Kind of recognizing that things are sort of up in the air. At this juncture, Lydia and I believe we're about $500,000 over. And we'll kind of walk you through, highlight some of the projects and hopefully get some discussion going and some feedback about what your priorities are. We may find out after Lydia has the opportunity to do this cleanup that we really don't have a problem. So hopefully we'll go ahead and get your guidance on what your priorities are, and we should be able to come back at your next meeting for sure with a fund that's in balance.
Matthews, I have a couple of questions. Can you scroll up?
Sure.
Actually, there's 3 things. So number 1, I'm looking at the city hall roof.
Yes.
It's not that big of a building. That's a lot of money for a roof. What don't I know about that? I don't want to assume it's just it's a peel and replace. But what's
My recollection, and Lydia, please jump in if you can. I think we asked about that because I think we had sort of the same question, and I'm not going to profess to be a roofing expert. I've only replaced a roof on one of my houses in my adult life. I believe because of the historic nature of the building, Lydia, is it correct? It's slate. Is that right? Okay.
I think that's what they had said, yeah.
Right, because we asked too, and apparently they also examined things, some kind of something that looks like slate, but actually isn't, and it wasn't any less expensive. So our understanding is that Mr. Strasberg, our street superintendent, has actually talked to roofers about what he might expect, and that this is a valid number.
I mean, the one thing that was in my head is I know it's a historic building, so I assumed there was something like that, but that's what I wanted to know. Next questions regarding the Wakefield Clubhouse roof.
Right.
You know,
Yeah.
I don't think we're going to want to do anything with that building in terms of improving it. So I would say highlight that.
Okay.
Let's bring it up at a next meeting. But we should talk more about that because I think my understanding of my colleagues, and I'm not going to speak for them, but the general discussions I've had one-on-one has been that building's probably not going to be able to be saved, so we don't want to put a new roof on it. The other thing is, and if you could scroll down to the I&I.
Sure.
I thought we moved money up to closer years, and it's still all $1 million per year.
Yeah, and that's something, it's a good question, and I kind of wanted to do that. This year, as you may recall, we actually have 1.6 million. So this was when we did the utility rate study, which I believe was 2 years ago. Probably started about 2.5 years ago, but we actually implemented the results of that in fiscal 19. They assumed for planning purposes for I&I about $1 million a year. We did advance 600,000. You're correct. I know that was something, Mayor, you were very committed to doing. That does sort of call into question whether or not the rates will be sufficient to have $1 million for every year of the CIP. So that's certainly something we need to work with Mr. Glass on. The projects that are anticipated in fiscal year 2022 are very scalable. You may recall that a lot of the projects we've done to date kind of take a specific geographic area. It all needs to be sort of done together as a system. What they presented for 2022 is actually a bunch of discrete lining projects that basically can be scaled up or down. So there is certainly some flexibility, but I think your question is more if we advanced money, how do we still have enough in the rate structure to basically support $1 million a year? And I think that's a good question.
Well, I guess what I'm wondering is why it says $1 million a year instead of, we were talking about moving not like 600,000, but millions of dollars from the last 3 years up. And I just want to, we wanted to speed up the I&I process since the money was going to be spent one way or another. So I would suggest if I guess Councilman Yingling, I think believes the chair, is okay with it, before our next budget meeting, if we could have a Public Works Committee meeting to maybe discuss that, even if it's a short one, if there's nothing else we need to talk about.
Okay. And we can certainly talk to Mr. Glass about that, and with Councilmember Yingling's concurrence, we can certainly try to get that scheduled.
That would be fine.
Yeah, and
if I could, I mean, I take the mayor's point. I think that, we were trying to advance that, so that we could, get more benefit more quickly. And yet, it's hard to believe that there's no, accompanying drop off in the need, at least at some point in this, in the total life of the CIP.
Yeah, what Mr. Glass has, and I think maybe would be good to have a Public Works Committee meeting because he could certainly address that more than Ms. Colston and I can. But I don't know if they asked for the $1 million because that's sort of what had been in the rate study, or if part of the work they're going to do is tied into any type of camera of the system they've done. But we'll certainly just get that meeting scheduled and let Mr. Glass, as the expert, kind of address that. If I could ask one other thing, back up on in the top part there, Sure.
Back to the City Hall roof. I mean, I'm not arguing, the cost, because, obviously I know slate's expensive and it may not be, possible to do anything different because of the historic nature, but because of the historic nature of the building, I'm wondering if, it's possible to, you go to the Historic Trust or some other source, to get some help on, on that. I mean, I don't think, I think that, I don't think we work, we try to access enough of those kind of opportunities that I know are out there. and maybe we can get some assistance
Sure.
in fixing that.
We can certainly start exploring that. In my experience, sometimes if they view it as more of a maintenance related issue, sometimes that's not where they want to put grant funding, but it certainly doesn't hurt to explore that and to ask.
Yeah.
I did want to touch on, if I may, the mayor's comment about the clubhouse. And we did have a discussion in our meeting with Mr. Strasberg and Mr. Amos about the clubhouse, because my impression was that the building was not in very good shape. And particularly since I think the mayor is certainly aware of this, we had, we have an alarm system on the building, and it's been a couple months, I guess, but we probably had some kids who broke a window or something. It set the alarm off, and one of our police officers responded, and basically thankfully only his leg, not his whole body, but fell through the floor. That certainly created in my mind an impression that the building was, truthfully practically falling apart. What Mr. Strasberg indicated was that was a rotten spot in the floor, but in general, the building was structurally sound in his opinion. He did raise the issue of the roof, and that if we didn't address the roof, we would start having water intrusion into the building. So I do think this is tied to sort of the broader discussion about, do you see a future for the clubhouse or not? But Mr. Strasberg did indicate that there was a rotten spot in the floor. They addressed that for safety reasons, but for the roof, he deemed the building to be fairly in structurally good shape. So I'm gonna go ahead and just switch this.
That surprises me, I have to say.
I was a little surprised too, because that was certainly not my impression of that building.
I reached out and I talked to Mr. Strasberg because I remember, I think, Barb, I told you I was going to talk to Jeff Glass, but he was on vacation or away at the time. So Mr. Strasberg said the same thing. He said that he thinks that the foundation's good. And actually, I think what he told me was the foundation was good, the roof was good, and everything else needed to be gutted. So, but here's what we've discussed and found out since then. The type of building that it isn't made to last that long. It's a pole building. So to put money into a building that we don't even know what we're going to use it for,
right,
when chances are it's not going to last that long anyway. This would be a hundreds of thousands of dollar project if we did it. And we don't know what the building's even worth. At some point, when a car gets totaled, it gets totaled. I think that we're probably there. That's my guess. Mr. Yingling might have some better insight on that. I mean, he certainly is going to know more about buildings in general than I do because of his profession. But that's my impression. It seems like it's a pretty clear cut decision.
So the mayor is right. It's a pole building. In fact, Hanover Building Services, based out of Hanover, PA, built it. And I mean, I remember being in that building when things were kind of falling apart. I mean, his heat was shut off. I mean, pipes burst. I mean, this is, just being a pole building in itself. And then also, I mean, it is a complete gut job. Foundation. Well, I mean, okay, good. I kind of echo the mayor's point. I don't see this as being a
priority.
Priority from me. I can't speak on behalf of, President Pecoraro, but it's certainly is not a priority for me.
Okay.
You're muted, Mr. President.
My and my thought on this goes to, if we're not going to fix the roof, if our view is that the building's not got much more of a useful life to it, as the mayor suggested, and I don't know. We'd asked for someone to take a look, and I'm glad Mr. Strasberg took a look, and we were going to see if there was any value in doing anything with it. But if we assume for the moment that what the mayor is saying is correct, then a roof this year, something else next year, keeping the building safe and secure. I mean, those are those are ongoing costs that the city's going to incur. And I wonder at what point we make the decision to kind of pull the plug on the whole thing and eliminate the building as a sort of a cost center for us that we're going to have to keep putting money into when there's no real plan to use it for anything else. And that to me is the final thing, that we don't have a plan to use it for anything. In all this time, no one has come to us with a suggestion of what to do with it. In all the discussions, and I don't want to get into a discussion about Wakefield Valley, but in all the conversations about Wakefield Valley, nobody has identified that as one of the things that they wanted to do was find a reuse for the building. I mean, all the activities there, to the extent that there are any activities discussed, are outdoors or require a very different type of infrastructure. So maybe what we ought to be talking about in the budget is, what would be the cost of demolition?
Okay.
I mean, I don't know if that makes sense to my colleagues, but to me, that seems like a more useful number to have.
Yeah, I agree, Mr. Picker. I think that's the way to go. All it is it's a graffiti magnet. It's an eyesore. It's a liability.
Right.
It's a place for people to go to do things they shouldn't do, and and it's not a safe building to be in. So I don't think it's and it's a pole building. So what are we patching? I think the slate roof is a much better investment than this. And here's the other, we have another building that we are going to preserve, and I know we're going to get grants, but it's likely going to cost us money. And there's very good reason to do so at that building. This building, there's no reason to hold on to it that I can think of. Some future thing that we don't know if it'll even happen. I think it's time to budget it's leaving the city, its departure.
And that's fine. And to clarify, Mr. Strasberg actually did not. There's another request as I walk through this about a fairly, a study to basically explore alternative uses. That's what prompted Ms. Colston and I to sort of talk to Mr. Strasberg about what kind of shape is the building in anyway. So he provided the number at my specific request because I wasn't sure, where the thought was about the building. There has been some discussion by some of your colleagues about, a venue for, wedding receptions and things. And Ms. Colston and I were actually talking about that earlier today. Certainly, I don't see that ever being a break-even proposition that would be run by city staff, because it's not only the building upkeep itself, it's who's taking reservations and how does all that work. Certainly I've seen some jurisdictions who have, candidly, facilities that are probably in somewhat better shape. I'm thinking like Glenview Mansion in Rockville. It is a very marketable property. Part of that's the setting, just like Wakefield. Some places actually, do public-private partnerships to have someone else run it, because we certainly don't know much about running a banquet facility at all. So anyway, that you're actually helping us address what is probably a deficit. So as I said, at this point, the CIP is in draft form. We've mentioned that there's projects that are coming on new. We also have projects that were in the 2021-26 CIP that suddenly don't seem to be needed for 2022. So we're currently looking at an overage of approximately $496,000. I believe as we have this discussion this evening, and as Lydia has the opportunity to kind of plug some of the holes with probably another couple of days, I suspect that a good chunk of that deficit may go away. If some of that still exists, obviously, there's always the option, depending on the nature of the project, to defer it. We can certainly scale back funding. We can eliminate projects, which I think you all are in the process of helping us do. This isn't my favorite option, but we certainly, this fiscal year have sold West End Place. We're about to sell the Winters lot, probably, within the next 60 days or 60 to 90 days. So I do think if there's some high value projects, we have had a one-time infusion of cash that certainly is appropriate for non-recurring projects. But we will go ahead and just kind of keep walking through everything.
I have a question.
Mhm.
Going back to the capital projects, you had mentioned some that appeared this year that hadn't in previous or something. And you mentioned the police headquarters
It was a
generator. Is there
right.
like I'm assuming they have to have a generator now.
They
And
do.
did it just like, I guess, is it just deteriorated beyond?
Yeah, it is failing.
Yeah. Okay. That's not good. Okay. Yeah. There you go.
Yeah, we did have, sometimes there are, and the police department is exploring those. There are sometimes grants through either MEMA or FEMA for things that basically, operate as emergency operations centers. They are exploring that currently. The issue sometimes is that their generator is apparently on its last legs, and those grant cycles tend to be fairly long. But we are kind of exploring some of those opportunities. City Hall roof was another one that wasn't in the last year's CIP. So we hope to get construction of the pool underway. What Ms. Gruber has been working on are some of the kind of pre-construction items, such as getting soil borings. I think she's in the process of trying to find an architect to help design just the filtration building. And we have hired a consultant to basically help with some of those activities, helping to draft the bid specs, because certainly that's a fairly technical exercise. That project is bond financed, as you know. So basically Lydia will be showing bond financing proceeds on the one side, and so it's kind of neutral from the FY 2022 budget. We always have every year, as you know, purchases of police vehicles and equipment. That's running roughly about $236,000. We do have some swings, and I know Lydia followed up on this. If you were to open your FY 2021 budget, the estimated cost of streets, vehicles, and equipment that was in the current CIP was, I believe, Lydia, $450,000 to $500,000 or something like that. That number has since been refined to $160,000 in FY 2022, which is certainly a huge help. As I mentioned, we do believe the leaf vacuum, which is $90,000 of that $160,000, can be paid for with special benefit assessment monies. We have projects such as the ADA curb ramp retrofit. That's something you all see every year. We just talked about the generator. City Hall, make sure I haven't skipped anything. Whoops. A City Hall roof. I decided not to share the screen so it's not dominating everything and you guys can see each other. This is an area that I did want to talk to you about, which is road paving. So this year in FY 2021, we really had a lot of trouble balancing capital. Mr. Glass has requested just over $1 million for road paving. That's pretty consistent, trending out in his request. This year, what we did is we did in FY 2021 align what we were going to do in road paving with what we were receiving from highway user revenue. Mr. Glass has expressed concern if we were to do that again, that we might start falling behind. You may recall, I think it was my first year with the city, we did take out a $5 million bond issue to try to get caught up, because certainly HUR got gutted in the late 2000s with the recession. So that'll be an item, I think, as Lydia and I try to work to bring everything, refine everything and get it into budget, maybe a decision-making point for the committee. And that's kind of why I wanted to start the discussion of this fund, was showing you the debt service, because there is going to be some that's dropping off. So certainly I think road paving is the bread and butter, things that have to be done. But right now, we don't have an alignment between HUR and what Mr. Glass feels that he needs.
Yeah, I'm a strong believer in continuing to do the road work, as it's necessary. It just costs you money in the long run if you don't.
Okay.
And I wonder if there's a way. I mean, I know last year we had some trouble, getting the contract done, in order to take advantage of some of the season. I think. I wonder. I mean, I know we do an annual contract. Is there an opportunity to do a multi-year contract to kind of lock some of that in and be able to keep things moving?
I would say we probably could. I think the big unknown in road paving cost is just the cost of petroleum.
Right.
I would guess, and I can certainly talk to Ms. Levan about this, and I can talk to Mr. Glass. there probably is a way to do that with some type of either, escalator or de-escalator tied to
Right.
some type of petroleum cost. And
I mean, it might wind up making us smooth out the cost, in terms of spikes, but might be worth looking into.
well, and I think what we tend to find, as you all are aware, is, we do get multiple bids. It is very hard for most people to compete with CJ Miller just because of the location.
Right.
So there is a lot of staff time that is involved with simply getting the bids and publishing them and things.
Right.
We can certainly explore that and see if, I'm sure there's a way to do it, and Mr. Glass will know how to handle the petroleum piece of it. We did receive a number of requests related to Longwell. They total 215,000. I'll just kind of walk through them. So as you all know, Longwell is a historic building with the armory. What was brought to our attention is that they have those huge windows, some which don't have screens, some of which, they're the old style windows that are sort of almost on sort of the ropes, if you will. And apparently they can come crashing down rather precipitously, which can create both a cracking problem and a possible danger if someone's hand's in there. Because of the nature of the historic nature of the building, and it is, under a Maryland Historic Trust easement, so we do need to get approval. What the street department came up with, which I think is kind of an ingenious idea, is, plus you have basketballs flying everywhere. So they proposed to have some type of, I think they called them window guards, but some sort of custom decorative metal work that would sort of fit into each of the windows and keep the basketballs from flying towards the glass, and also keep users from basically trying to prop open windows that may not actually stay open. So they apparently talked to someone about making these things. I've not seen any kind of design, but it has an associated cost of about $35,000. The locker room renovation, you may recall, because this was something, I know I got asked this by a couple people, didn't we just do this? That was actually the shower rooms that were renovated. This is the actual locker rooms. That has a cost of about $65,000. The HVAC system design is probably something that can be pushed. I'm trying to think if it would have happened. I know President Pecoraro, it happened during your tenure. I can't recall if it happened. Actually, I'm sure it happened. All of you were in elected office, but we commissioned a study to sort of look at the kind of the mishmash of HVAC system components at the armory. They gave us some numbers. I would say this number is probably a little outdated at this point. But there was actually some further design that would be needed. Roughly has $100,000 cost. The actual estimate to put in one of the systems, which would be a subsequent year, was $756,000. So I do think this is one of the projects that, you may want to come back to, and as you try to bring things into alignment, this has been pushed a number of years already, mainly because we don't have $756,000 of actual construction money to put a new system in.
And that's in addition to the 100,000, right? So
Yes,
100,000, so it'll be like 850. How much did we put into Longwell last year?
The shower room renovation ran over a little bit because of it. We had some problems with the design that was done and ADA compliance issues. That came in at roughly around 80,000. I'm trying to remember, Mayor, whether or not you all authorized the purchase of cardio equipment in FY 2021 or not.
I believe we did. I believe that's when it started. I'm not 100%, but I'm pretty sure.
I
So
think
that was 15 each year for like
Right,
6 years or something, right?
Yeah, so I'm thinking it's probably roughly about 95,000.
Okay.
So on the Longwell building, my thought is this, and I've been saying this for years, that it's a big old building. It obviously needs, has needs, and we obviously have an obligation, to take care of it. But what I really object to is this piecemeal way that we're doing it.
Yep.
And every year we keep getting, sort of, well, we want to do this, we want to do that. And what I've asked for several years and we've never seen is a comprehensive look at, to get somebody to take a look at it and say, what does this building need? You know, and look at all that. I mean, I don't want to spend $100,000 on an HVA system, you know, design, you know, when we haven't looked at the total. I mean, you know,
Right.
I mean, I want to know how that fits in with other things that the building needs. I mean, because, you know, I think we just wind up, you know, costing ourselves money by not having a comprehensive look at it and then saying, all right, what's the smart way to phase this to get it all done, you know, and done the right way.
Right, and we actually included in the FY 2021 budget a ballpark figure of $25,000 in this year's budget to have such a study commissioned. And when I went to Mr. Glass and Ms. Gruber, and certainly there's still some time left in the fiscal year, President Pecoraro, and I will share what their comments were. I'll pull up the actual emails. They both pointed to other studies that were done and they questioned the value of doing that. But I would say that every year that we look at the CIP, you are correct. We start seeing surprises.
Well, if they have other studies,
yeah.
if they would like to take a look at those studies and turn them into one report that would lay it all out, that would be satisfactory.
Okay.
But in the absence of that, we do keep doing this in a piecemeal fashion, which I object to.
Right, and I do think we've been, you know, I can't remember what the mayor, I'll have to remember, but there was something we ended up having to do with Longwell, I think in either FY 20 or 21, that I think was unbudgeted. We certainly have had a number of
issues with the roof, is that it?
roof-related issues multiple times during my tenure with the city. So yeah, I will basically pull that together, circle back around with Ms. Gruber and Mr. Glass, and share that with the committee. And then we can, you know, plan to have some further discussion of that at your next meeting.
So to President Pecораro's point, and since we're already going to be holding a Public Works Committee meeting,
that's a good idea.
I think that some of these capital projects should probably, we you know, if we have more questions, why don't we incorporate that into the agenda? So we can look at those reports and or studies and get the assessment, so we can kind of focus here on making budget decisions, you know, necessarily, you know, decisions on, okay, what are we going to do with specific buildings or something like that. But yeah.
Okay, yeah, and I will circle back around with you all tomorrow to try to get that scheduled, because by the time we meet with you all on the 26th, my hope is that we can lock a lot of this down, because at that point, we're only about 2 weeks away from budget presentation, and there's a whole lot that happens between those two dates. So I'll be checking with you on your dates, availability for a Public Works Committee meeting, hopefully for next week.
That would be fine. I can make myself available. I'm sure everybody else can.
So this is the some of the other requests that we received, just to kind of get a reaction in case Ms. Colston and I do need to go back and start cutting things or moving stuff around. We did receive a request to renovate the restrooms at City Park. The estimated cost of that is about $75,000. That request, I believe, it kind of gets funneled through facilities, which falls under Mr. Strasburg. But I think the request came from Ms. Gruber. I think when we met with Mr. Strasburg and asked him to prioritize kind of his facilities related items, the City Hall roof was number one. And Lydia, do you remember what the second one was? With another facilities project? I don't, but anyway, this was one that he, you know, I think because it's more kind of cosmetic, and certainly it provides a better experience for someone using the restrooms at City Park. Mr. Strasburg, not surprisingly, was going to prioritize something that was more structural, such as the City Hall roof, and I just don't remember what the second one was. Durbin House, this is the project we talked about earlier. This is the one that would seal the building envelope and, you know, actually kind of preserve the building while we try to figure out what its future use is. We have submitted an MHAA grant application, which would be for $100,000. I believe when the mayor brought this forward and sort of briefed you all on, you know, his signing certain documents for that grant application at that time, I relayed to him based on my conversation with Ms. Gruber, and he relayed to the rest of the elected body that we thought we might be able to leverage other city funds that we had expended for the required city match. That does not now appear to be the case. So it is a $200,000 project. I think Ms. Gruber does a great job submitting grant applications, and certainly she was encouraged to submit one. So that's kind of a nice indication that they would probably look on it favorably. If that is a project we move forward with, the city would, it seems like almost inevitably have a required match of $100,000 that we would need to come up with. So that's a little different than what we talked about before. I would say that it's a lot of money, but if we want to save that building, I think we are at a point where something needs to be done.
Yeah, I think everyone's, I think the general thought is we're on board with saving that building. We'll see when we present this to everybody, but this building's a different story. I think it's still in good shape. It's got historic value, and if we're going to end up doing it, we might as well get a match. So
exactly. So we are obviously working on the master plan for Wakefield Valley Park, and talking to Ms. Gruber. I think we would like to maybe, I think when you have that kind of community involvement in developing a master plan, it's nice if you can start showing the community that the master plan mattered, their feedback mattered. So we would like to start that process of implementing some of what's coming up through that master plan process. What Ms. Gruber and I have discussed is maybe as an initial priority is kind of refining, we call it a trail system now, but it's actually obviously the old golf cart path. That is not going to be an inexpensive process. Will probably need to be done certainly in stages, because once we start touching those, it triggers certain ADA requirements. So she has a ballpark number of 200,000. As I mentioned earlier, we do have some program open space funding left over from FY 2019 that could be applied as a revenue towards that 200,000. We've got roughly $86,000 in hand. And certainly if, depending on what we hear from the county about program open space for FY 2022, we may have additional program open space funding that could supplement that roughly 86,000. So while it is a $200,000 project, right now, based on how things stand, we're looking at sort of a city out-of-pocket cost of about 114, because there's a somewhat offsetting revenue. I guess, does the committee have any, kind of feedback on, a lot of what we've talked about is sort of kind of the bricks and mortar, doing ADA curb ramps, it's paving, kind of the nuts and bolts infrastructure things. How do you feel about this project, just in general, if funding permits?
Yeah, I think the trail system is definitely the place to start. It's something that, no matter what other conversations we have about Wakefield, that I think is something that's universally, acceptable and sought. So it's a great place to start.
Okay. I guess just like I say, I think so much of what's typically in our capital, are things that are, like I say, kind of the bread and butter of what you do in a capital project. The things that are probably a little bit more discretionary, we've already talked about Durbin House. If you had to weigh, because the numbers are a little bit different, but if we got into a situation where we did have to make decisions, would the committee weigh Wakefield Valley, the trail system, higher than the city park restroom renovation, for example?
How bad are the city park restrooms?
That's what I was going to ask.
As many times as I've been there, I've actually never used the restroom. So
I think I used them when we had a picnic there,
yeah,
a staff picnic or something, and they weren't, they're not lovely, but I don't know that they're terrible.
Okay, yeah, I think that would be the assessment. That they could just use a little bit of a facelift.
Yeah, they're rough and outdoors. I don't know that. $75,000 seems like a lot of money for it.
We can go back, like I say, if we end up needing to pare the list down, that was certainly lower on Mr. Strasburg's list compared to, other things that are more structural in nature. Your feedback seems to be higher, understandably, on Durbin House and on the trail system. So I'll just see if I can get a little bit more information from Ms. Gruber. But it seems like it's lower on your priority list than some of the other items we've talked about tonight. that a fair kind of assessment?
I think so.
Okay. I guess I think I can answer this question. I think we
And
did.
speaking of which, I would say that, the city playground, excuse me, I mean, a lot of folks live nearby, there's, a lot of people use the park, don't live too far. If you're down at Wakefield Valley using the trails, there are no restroom facilities down there at all. That might actually be, to my thinking, that might be something that, there ought to be some planning for along the way.
I will check with Ms. Gruber about kind of where that is in the master plan. We've tentatively scheduled a presentation by Pannoni, potentially in April or May. I think we'll just need to work with you, Mayor, and President Pecoraro in terms of just how long you want your meetings to be,
Yeah.
tackling budget. So,
Yeah.
but I'll ask.
I think we're going to probably have to push that back a little bit because, I think we got a lot going on before, in April with getting the budget done and everything else. But
yeah, I mentioned that to her. I think at the earliest they weren't going to be ready in March. So I'm not sure it's going to be the end of the world if you slide to May.
yeah, I think it's going to be May.
Okay, I'll let her know that then so she can plan that with Pannoni. We talked a little bit about Wakefield Clubhouse. I don't think we need to belabor that. Ms. Colston and I will go back and talk to Mr. Strasberg and Mr. Glass about getting estimates for demolishing the building. Just to
Good, we already have $83,000 budgeted to take that thing out of there.
there you go. We
Maybe the fire department could make it a training exercise.
Don't laugh about that. I've worked in a lot of cities that actually had paid fire departments, and
No, I have too, and I've seen it done.
I actually got to participate in a live burn.
As long as they don't use PFAS.
Yeah, I was going to say the worst thing to do is to be in St. Louis, Missouri, which has one of the worst summers even compared to the Baltimore, DC area, and to have be in a burning building with 95-degree heat with all the firefighter equipment on. It was not a pleasant experience, but I certainly got to experience what our firefighters did for a living. One of the holes in the capital projects fund, which, I don't have a good sense of scale yet. The Center Street outfall was recently found to be failing. We actually just awarded a contract to CLSI for design that just really got started within the last couple, probably less than 30 days. We have asked Mr. Glass for a rough order of magnitude. It's obviously hard for him to give us a number for something that's not even 30 days into design, but there will be a cost associated with that. I imagine there's nothing in construction you do that's probably less than $75,000. So that'll be kind of an add to what you've seen so far tonight. I'm kind of switching to the other funds, and this will kind of pick up the pace, and then we'll probably slow back down again. For the water fund, just as a reminder, you've already established your 2020 water rates. Those were adopted in conjunction with the FY 2019 budget. And that was part of the multi-year rate study that we had done. So water rates will go up 3.5%. In terms of projects, I always hate to gloss over the utility projects because it's not that they're not important, but there's not generally as many decisions that have to be made. You will see in the final version of the CIP continued work on the Westminster Water Reuse Initiative. Just as a reminder, Mr. Glass and his staff did apply for and receive a U.S. Bureau of Reclamation grant through the Department of the Interior. So we will have some offsetting revenues, but there certainly will still be, a financial cost to the city for that initiative. The other big unknown in the water fund, and this is very much a placeholder, as you know, through testing through MDE, we were found to have PFAS at well 8 that we are now required to put a filtration system in to mitigate. Back in, I believe it was January, you awarded a contract to GHD for that work. There are 2 different filtration systems that GHD is exploring. One would probably be very simple and not very costly. The other could be as high as in the $400,000 to $500,000 range. Just so we had something in the CIP while that design work by GHD continues. Mr. Glass, when asked for a placeholder amount, gave us a number of $250,000, but I do want to stress that number is basically just a placeholder. I don't think there's necessarily any integrity to that number at this early stage in GHD's work. Switching to the sewer funds, just flips out of the water. You have already adopted the rates. Sewer rates are scheduled to go up 5%. In FY 2022, you'll see continued construction of the ENR and biosolids project. You'll also see continued work on the county septic facility, which once again is paid for 100% by the county. We already talked a little bit about the inflow and infiltration project, and we will talk about that further at the Public Works Committee and hopefully kind of work that out before your next meeting. I wanted to switch to the fiber fund, and this is kind of be cognizant of the time. And this is more to see kind of what questions you have and make sure everyone sort of understands. I don't think this is going to be new to the committee necessarily, because we've been kind of saying the same thing for a while. But as you know, we got a operating loan from the state to support the operation of the Westminster fiber network. The loan has a 30-year term, it's 0% interest, and it's basically a balloon payment of the $1.3 million at the end of the 30-year term. Debt service is an ineligible expense. So basically, we start off with 1.3 million. In FY 2020, we drew down about 377,000. This fiscal year, we are scheduled to draw down about 406,000, which will leave a balance of about 517,000. We, at this juncture, I think we will either run through that 517,000. If not in FY 2022, certainly it will not get us very far into FY 2023. So the loan proceeds are almost exhausted within the next, probably 12 to 15 months. Thought it might be helpful to sort of look at the take rates. These were actually taken from the quarterly reports that are made to the Mayor and Common Council. And I picked these 3 periods not only because they were the more recent, but you may recall going back into like the first quarter of calendar year 2020, we made some adjustments in the serviceable premises. Once those addresses came out, basically it's sort of, if you change the denominator, basically the percentage is going to automatically go higher just from a mathematical standpoint. So these quarters were also the most recent, but it was also based on the same number of units roughly without that. So as you can see, we are seeing some growth pretty much across all phases. Some of it has gone faster than others. Certainly phase 3 has been particularly incremental. So we are seeing some growth in subscribers, but certainly that growth is fairly incremental. There was some discussion, sorry, it's a little bit cut off, hopefully you can see that. This is at Monday night's meeting, you received the auditor's presentation for FY 2020. This is basically one of the same information that was presented in one of their exhibits. They basically showed it for all basically proprietary funds. I just basically took that information and just pulled out the fiber fund. So this is where, if you have any questions about this, I'm going to definitely turn it over to Lydia. As I told her, this is where not being an accountant basically makes me a little less able to do this. But if you're comparing the results, certainly, and the auditor sort of commented on this, we're starting to see, we built the network, it is starting to depreciate. So if you look at between FY 2019 and FY 20, depreciation changed fairly dramatically. Lydia, if I misspeak, please correct me. So like I said, I know my limitations. So depreciation, and Lydia was helping to educate me on this, it's not a cash expense. So Lydia, I'm going to turn it over to you to show how it actually hits the books and what it means, if you don't mind. I'll massacre it based on what you told me.
You actually said the crux of the matter. It's not a cash flow issue, so it doesn't affect, as most of you know, the cash flow of the fund, but it is part of the expenses of the fund, and at the end of the year, we're still in a negative net change in position of 955,000. The problem is that's not going to go away, and I'm not sure where this fund goes. in essence. And it's just a discussion that we need to really be aware of and know that the debt service is coming due, and there's just, I don't know what to say.
So I still don't understand though. What does it mean? What is depreciating to the extent of almost $700,000? What does that really mean?
It's the assets that we've put in, so the fiber and all those that we had paid to lay into the ground and whatnot, that this is the first full year of depreciation, which is why you see the jump. I think 2019 wasn't a full year of it. But it's going to be about that. If it might be a little bit less next year, but not much.
Yeah, but what does it mean? I mean, it's no cash. The fiber isn't decaying. What does it
No,
really
well,
mean?
They're
well,
not
there's a
positioned.
there's a
So it's our
useful
balance sheet.
life of that fiber, and so that depreciation expense is allocating that cost over that life of that asset. So at the end of it, it's going to be worthless, and we'll have to replay it. So what we're doing is, instead of like taking the expense all at once of the fiber, we're expensing it over a period of time. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and Lydia, may I ask a question? Because if I
Sure.
recall, and I think it may have been I read it someplace. It may have been in the auditor's presentation, or I may have read it elsewhere. But there was a comment made in whatever form the auditors did it, as I recall, and once again, if I'm misremembering, let me know, that part of the issue they flagged is that the system was depreciating more quickly than the actual principal payments on the debt, or something to that effect.
Correct. So we're gonna owe money after the asset is worthless.
Right, okay, that's a better way of putting it than I was trying to struggle to say.
Lydia,
but what does
what's
that
the
mean?
depreciation schedule? How long is it? How many years?
I don't have that off the top of my head. I can look into that and get that to you.
Okay.
I mean, when you say the system's going to be worthless, I mean,
Well, that's all.
what does that mean? That's not true. That's ridiculous. What does that mean?
It just means it's not. That's all assets. It's how it works. Like not so much that it's worthless, but just that you don't have to. You're not going to. So, like, say you have a car that you expect to last for about 7 years. When you buy that car, you don't take all the expense in that first year. You take it over the 7 years. So that's what we're doing with this fiber here. We're not taking all the expense in that first year that it cost us to pay for it. We're taking that expense slowly over the year. So if we had expensed it all at once, we would have been like, I don't know how much we spent, but millions in the negative. But we're doing that
So
slowly.
the bond, so the loan, the bond was for how many years?
I think that was 20 years.
30.
No, it was
Was it 30?
It was
30.
30, and then we started off, as you may recall, just going through a bank loan, which had a variable interest rate. Now, obviously, if anyone could have predicted what was going to happen with interest rates, we might have handled things differently. But we basically went through the CDA, and then a couple years in, issued new 30-year debt for it. So, I wanted to basically show this because the auditors talked about it, but I think beyond the depreciation issue, I think there's probably another number that I think is probably more material. So would kind of draw everybody to the $712,000 number. Even if you ignore depreciation, look at the operating expense number. And then what I want to show you is the debt service. So once again, we're looking at operating expenses and we're looking at revenues of roughly $712,000, and take rates that are basically going up fairly incrementally. This is where I think, rather than getting too caught up in the depreciation, is this. So basically, if you go back, this year we budgeted about $725,000 roughly in fiber revenue. That's 700, and I think we're going to hit that number. But that 725,000 in fiber revenue isn't even sufficient to cover the debt cost That I think is the number I would encourage you all to focus on more than the depreciation, because this is a cash number. This is not, anything on a balance sheet or a paper number. This is, the city's not bringing in enough money to even pay its debt service. And there are operating expenses, the staff, the materials, the maintenance of the system that are on top of this 925,000. And that's where we've been relying, which was certainly very helpful for the state to give to us, but we have been drawing down that operating loan to make up for that shortfall. And that's a cash shortfall. That's not a paper shortfall. And I know, Lydia, there's probably a more intellectual way of saying that than I'm saying. But when that loan runs out, and which is about to happen in the next 12 to 15 months, probably, the only way, the city is going to have to find a way on a cash basis to make up that shortfall. That's the issue with this fund. That's the issue, I think, the longer term financial problem that the city is facing. And when you go back and you look at take rates that are going up incrementally, even if there's continued incremental growth in the system, it is never going to be enough to address this problem. And that's the long-term financial issue that the city is going to have to deal with, ultimately the mayor and common council as the elected body. So, I don't think it's going to be we still have the loan to draw on for FY 2022. The issue, and it's going to be a different elected body and a different city administrator, I think that the city is going to have to grapple with is, what does the city do beginning in FY 2023? Because there's going to be somewhere probably in the neighborhood of a $400,000 to $500,000 shortfall. And where is that going to come from? So, I think Lydia and I are still kind of working through just the mechanics of the FY 2022 numbers and, how much of the state loan do we need? And some of that's tied to, just the operating costs, which we're still working with staff on. That is out of everything in this budget. And I don't think this is news to the three of you, because you've been a part of the finance committee for most of my tenure. This is the structural deficit issue in the city's financial structure that a solution has to be found. And I don't think it's going to be an easy one. And I don't think it's going to be solved by just getting subscribers.
So can I make a comment, as I've
Certainly.
kind of been talking about this for the last couple of years?
Mhm.
Well, I guess, we kind of know what the two options are that are difficult. I think that we need to revisit the kind of utility fee option.
Right.
Yeah, I think a fee for the utility is really the only option here. Obviously, this was pitched as an economic development tool that was going to, drive economic development to pay for this. And certainly I'm sure that it will over time, but essentially we have a cash issue and it's a short-term issue. So that's what I would look into, and very strongly, as I've mentioned in previous meetings.
You have, and I had some, I think, Councilmember Yingling, you and I have talked about this. And I think, and I will put this in, not only share this with you all tonight, but obviously in a formal budget transmittal message, but 2022 is where all the nitty gritty details of how we would do that, just the mechanics of it, and talking to Ms. Levan about just sort of the legal aspects of it. She believes it can be done. So it's, what is the amount of the fee that is needed? There may be the tricky part of this that needs to be worked out. And that's why I say, I think it's an FY 2022 fairly urgent project, is there are segments of the city that aren't being served by the network. And Ms. Levan would ultimately be the one to have to counsel you on this. But can you assess a fee against a property owner that even doesn't, from a logistical standpoint, can't be serviced by the Westminster fiber network? So, I do think there's at least, from what she has told me, kind of a legal construct that would allow the type of fee that Councilmember Yingling has been talking about. And certainly I think it's going to be a high priority for my successor to start working on that with the mayor and common council.
Unless anybody else on the committee has any other ideas.
Yeah, I think we've talked about this a number of times, and I think we've all expressed general support for the idea.
Yeah. And we did do some preliminary work on it. I think it's these, which once again, when Miss Levanna's back from vacation, I'll, we probably should have a staff meeting with her just to sort of make sure she understands what parts of the city are not currently serviced by the network, and get her legal guidance on that so we can start putting together a plan sooner rather than later. I think the other comment.
Do you think long-term planning needs to be a little tighter on this? Because I understand that this is very different than what a lot of cities handle. So I don't know if our financial forecast is going to be as accurate as it is in a lot of other areas. And the reason I say that is because fiber does last a long time, but eventually it does start to need to be replaced and things like that. And so that's the kind of stuff that needs to be factored into not the debt service table here, but
right.
Future, because the last thing you want to do is address the situation and have to address it again.
Right.
I understand, I have a general understanding of how that stuff works, but not necessarily from the financial side. I just know that it has an impact. So, but that's something that, as more cities have had fiber, fiber networks built, some before Westminster, you might be able to get some of that information kind of, from some of those cities. Yeah. But that's, I don't know, that's just something I think we should keep in mind, because, as more people sign up and networks, parts of the network start to fail, and actually depreciate in real life, not just on paper,
right.
it'll take more staff. It'll take more, more money to actually replace and fix it. So it's probably a little ways down the road. That's not around the corner, but it certainly should be something that's considered for, a few years from now and on.
Well, I agree. I mean, I think it's a lot easier if we put in a new user fee to try to set that fee at a level that it can remain constant for a couple of years, and provide some continuity. I do know that Mr. Dick, has established a very good relationship with, and I think former President Hvac had kind of made that connection with Wilson, North Carolina. I do think their system, I believe, from a construction standpoint, was constructed somewhat differently than ours. So I think, Mayor, your comment about sort of getting ahead of the curve and kind of understanding what to expect would be very helpful. I think the other thing that, in talking to Lydia, and you all may recall from Monday night's presentation by the auditors, and their comment was really made about the city's public housing authority, but you may recall they raised in one of their findings about having kind of a consistent basis of how we're applying cost across, and that particular finding was about the public housing authority. But we have struggled, as anyone would do, with a fairly new fund, and it's always an issue anytime you start doing cost allocations of your staff, of who should be allocated and what percentage, because none of us sit there and basically allocate our time by every 5-minute increments. But for example, Ms. Colston, who certainly spends time dealing with fiber, our current kind of cost allocation to the fiber fund does not include anything for Ms. Colston. It doesn't include anything for Mr. Glass. It doesn't include anything for the city administrator, all of whom arguably spend time. So I'm not certainly saying take a difficult situation and make it worse, but I think we just need to be cognizant of the fact that even the numbers that are on the screen right now in terms of operating expenses are probably not fully representative of the time that is spent on this activity. So once again, we will be bringing back, I think, numbers for FY 2022, but I think for the purpose of the fiber fund, that's really probably not what the focus needs to be. It's this longer term outlook that we just sort of talked about. I know we're getting close to kind of what we said. We'd try to keep it to 2 hours. I did want to, that would be very helpful to Ms. Colston and myself, is to talk a little bit about financial support to Magic, I did provide you all with just sort of, they are under a grant agreement, as you know, provide report to you all quarterly. They provide kind of data related to certain program metrics that are embedded in that grant agreement. And I wanted to just share that kind of historical information with you. So as you know, we did provide some financial support prior to FY 2018 to Magic. The city had a contract with an individual who's was tasked with basically promoting the Westminster fiber network, but he also kind of wore two hats and was the Magic executive director, in the city kind of under his contract paid for both those services. Beginning in 2018, through the current fiscal year, we have provided a grant in the amount of $80,000 to Magic. At the end of fiscal year 2021, we would have given Magic $320,000 in total. Once again, that number doesn't include this. And that has been booked to date as a fiber fund operating expense. And I think that was done under the thinking that Magic's primary role was to, and we've had a lot of discussion about this, to kind of promote the fiber network. And there's been different feelings about whether that's actually what Magic's role is or not, but that was sort of the original thinking beginning in 18 to book that $80,000 to the fiber fund. These are just really kind of discussion points, whether you want to just sort of ponder these or if you want to give some direction tonight, that certainly would be helpful in terms of Lydia and I locking things down. But ultimately, from my perspective, whether it is an entity to which the city is providing grant funding, or if it's just programs and services that the city has as part of its portfolio, the fundamental question that I would ask myself if I were an elected official is, has the city's investment paid off? Are you getting the results that you wanted? And that's part of the reason why I wanted just to kind of remind you of the performance metric data that I sent to you, later in the day yesterday than I had planned to, and I apologize for that. From a budgetary standpoint, and once again, I know you've been at this for almost an hour and 45 minutes, but the question that Lydia and I probably need answered, if not tonight, certainly at your next meeting, is should the city continue providing grant funding to Magic in FY 2022? And if so, what is the level of that funding that the committee would like Lydia and I to include in the budget for FY 2022? Some other issues related to that is where should the grant funding, if you choose to provide the same, be budgeted? As I mentioned in prior years, we have considered it a fiber fund operating expense. I will say this is certainly my vantage point, and you may not share it. I certainly think Magic is kind of venturing into some activities that I think would be difficult in my mind to justify saying it is related to the Westminster fiber network operation or promotion. And I would point to the autonomous vehicle. I'm not in saying that making any assessment of the value of that activity. I'm just saying from a budgetary standpoint, I think it's hard to tie it directly to the operation of the fiber network itself. If you were to agree with that assessment and you want to provide grant funding to Magic, I would suggest to the committee that that grant funding to Magic perhaps is more appropriately budgeted in the general fund rather than the fiber fund. So with that, and I'm going to kind of look to President Pecoraro as the chair of the committee. I don't know, President Pecoraro, if you want to go ahead and kind of start talking about these issues this evening, if you want the committee members to kind of ponder them. But that staff is looking for direction, I think, both on the funding level for Magic, if any, and I guess some concurrence from the committee as to where any grant funding should be budgeted. That would certainly help move things along for Lydia and myself.
How much more do you have?
Basically nothing, just going over the schedule and basically finding out what kind of information request or how else staff can help you prior to your next meeting. So we're pretty much done for anything that really requires discussion after this item.
If the committee is interested in discussing this, we certainly can. We've got a little bit of time, before we were supposed to, adjourn for the evening. I'd like some time to think about some of these other issues that you raised, before I, I give any guidance, I think, I'd like to give that some thought myself, but I'd like to know what the other members think.
Well, I think
Anybody anxious to
My
get into
assistant
this
can
tonight?
Curtis.
go. Well, I'll go first because it's not gonna be any surprise. I'm actually, it's kind of concerning and about the where it should be. So I don't. I mean, if it's appropriate to be somewhere else, if that is the desire of the council, which I believe it will be, to fund it, then definitely put it somewhere else. Because they are venturing outside of the realm of supporting the fiber network. I mean, I think we've known that for years. I did notice in their performance metrics that they have gotten a substantial amount more of grant funding,
Yeah,
which is
Graham has
encouraging.
yeah, he's done a great job with that.
And I kind of knew that Graham would. So as the discussion was last year, we didn't want to pull the rug out from under them, and rightfully so. But I do believe, that this, we've invested a lot of money. I frankly do not believe we've gotten return on the investment as evidenced by, the fund itself. Do I believe that we should cut their entire funding? I think that's a conversation that we should have with Graham. And I do believe, though, this year we should not put $80,000 in. What that number looks like, I don't know. I know that there's a strong sentiment on the council and to fund this initiative, but I just, I do not think we should put that money in there. Not $80,000. So that's all I got to say.
Mr. Mayor?
I mean, my opinion hasn't really changed since last year. I think that Graham's done a really good job of doing some new things and bringing some new ideas to the table. I've never really considered this to be tied that closely to fiber, though. I feel like to people that aren't in technology, you look at it and it all feels like it works together. But it's not really tied to fiber at all. But that's the first issue. The second issue, my opinion hasn't changed since last year. I mean, I agree with Ben. I've never wanted to pull the rug out, but I do think that we at some point need to get on a schedule of a each year the amount going down, and that would give them plenty of time to to replace those funds with grants. And I mean, he's already doing it. He's done a great job with it. And at this pace, he will increase his grants faster than he would lose funding if it was only, what I think would be a fair schedule of, a diminishing grant from us. So that's where I'm at fundamentally on it.
And if I can mention too, I think noticing his grants, some of them are multi-year. So he's definitely on the right path, or at least I think if I glance through, I'm pretty sure they're multi-year. So as he continues to build that, but yeah, I would definitely recommend reducing, if any, funding. But certainly I understand that we have a couple more of our colleagues that will have an opinion about that. So we'll just see how that works out.
Yeah, President.
I continue to see more value in it than Joe and Ben do. But I'm interested in this idea of whether or not it ought to be in the fiber fund or not. I think that a fair amount of their activity is tied to the fact that Westminster has built this fiber network, and that they are helping to help market it, increase awareness of it, help people understand that they can capitalize on it and do business here in Westminster, or have their business here in Westminster. But at the same time, I think that they are looking at some other things like the autonomous vehicle, which is an exciting thing, but certainly is not tied to the fiber. So I think that's something that's worth exploring, is whether or not we ought to be thinking about a home for this grant coming from some other source of funding.
I mean, I think it's not that I don't see value in it. I definitely see value in it. I just think that if the city is going to do
Well, I didn't say you don't see value. I said I think
as
I see
much,
more value.
I mean, I will say that I think more than that, it's just that if the city's going to help with nonprofits, I think I'm more supportive of the idea that we seed them and help them get started and not fund them, you know, in perpetuity or close. And I know I don't know if I don't think the sentiment's the same as it used to be, but it used to be, well, we're going to do this for 30 years no matter what, because we know it's going to take that long to see anything from it. And I don't know if anyone agrees with that anymore, but I guess my point is, you know, funding a nonprofit in perpetuity probably isn't what I'm not going to be as supportive of that as I am getting it off the ground, helping them get their start. They have, you know, some legs under them in terms of getting their own funding. You know, that I think is a better plan. That's, you know, that's really all. But I still don't. I mean, I've asked how, you know, how this really supposed to promote fiber, and I haven't gotten an answer that I believe answers that from anybody. So I think that was that was your first question. You know, it does some neat things. I mean, it's in my field of work, and they do things I'm interested in, but it doesn't really have anything to do with promoting city fiber.
Yeah, I mean, I think when I started, and I think particularly with the way the contract was in place when I joined the city in January of 2017, certainly there was a lot of discussion at that time about kind of the symbiotic relationship between the fiber network and Magic. And that's a judgment call. You know, I think President Pecoraro, my guess is that you'd like us to kind of bring this back at your next meeting, which certainly staff is happy to do. You know, I think my own kind of ending comment on this, and basically it's not just true of Magic, it's true of everything we've talked about tonight. You know, budgeting is nothing more than value judgments of what you think best serves the community. You know, I think if we were to kind of tick through some of the items we covered earlier, you know, especially I think if this moves to the general fund, which I do believe is probably where it's more appropriately situated, you know, it's, I'm just going to use the $80,000 figure, recognizing that some of you have different feelings about that, but, you know, do you want to fund a position in technology for 80,000? Do you think that funding Magic is more beneficial to the city? And I could, you know, there's endless examples of that. But ultimately, budgeting is just about value judgments about what you think best serves the organization and what best serves the community. And I imagine with 6 different people on the elected body, there's probably 6 different opinions about that.
I was just going to say, I think this is one of those issues, and I would like to keep these to a small few number of them that I think just needs to be discussed with the entire elected body. I don't think this is a, you know, that's all it is. I mean, that's my opinion on this. We'll have the same discussion all over again, so we might as well just.
Right, and I don't know, I guess Mayor, I'm gonna ask you and President Pecoraro on this, is where in the budget process, you know, I mean, there's different ways of handling this. You know, we're just gonna need to get to the point within probably the next 2+ week, 2.5 weeks, probably at the latest, whether we house it someplace initially, or you choose to, you know, you can certainly always add things during the budget process. You know, what we do with it just from the standpoint of getting you to the point that you have a draft budget that can be presented on April 12th. You don't need to tell us that this evening, but Lydia and I will need to know that on March 26th for sure, because we just need to know, do we put a number in? And if so, where does it go? Or is it something you want us to leave out pending discussion among the broader elected body? And so I think if you all can just be thinking about that and just be prepared to give us direction at your last meeting, that would certainly be fine.
I don't think we need to really think about much. I think if we're bringing it in front of the full elected body, I think the placeholder should just be what it was last year, and then we'll talk about it. And I don't know, or we have to have the whole discussion of that we're going to have in front of the whole elected body again. So, my opinion.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. Yeah, so let's leave the placeholder where it is, and we'll have that discussion.
Okay, yeah, we just need to have basically numbers to actually show you. So just as we close, this is obviously just the budget schedule. Right now, as the schedule stands, you have one more committee meeting, which will basically be kind of, I mean, I probably got the wrong way to put it, but for staff to get to the point that we present a budget to you on April 12th, basically, we'll need all decisions made on that date. There's just a lot of work that has to be done. Obviously, the big hole that staff has left the committee with at this point is, the salary results and the Evergreen study. So, we can talk in a few minutes whether you think that March 26th meeting is sufficient or not. I think
I'm certainly willing to have another meeting if that would be helpful to everybody. And, I can certainly make the time. And I'm
yeah,
sure, the mayor and Mr. Yingling can as well.
yep, I say a thumbs up from Councilmember Yingling. So we obviously need to kind of wrap up everything with Evergreen. Like I say, I had a conversation with them this afternoon. They have really moved on this. The issue is that when I looked with them at some of the data points, we had what I was kind of personally struggling with and looking at some of the preliminary results is we had a lot of data points where we might have only had 3 benchmarks respond. And that was a little bit different than we saw last time. So the problem when you have only 3 data points and you're looking at, say, a particular position, is the results can very easily be skewed. So that was the conversation I had with them today. So I will be revisiting that with them after they run some numbers in a different way. April 12th is the date. We are scheduled to present the proposed budget to you all and introduce the budget ordinance on that date. As you know, as of now, we have 2 budget work sessions built in. I guess I would just ask the committee, and we can certainly talk about this at your next meeting, as you kind of have wrestled with issues yourself, whether or not 2 budget work sessions is going to be sufficient or not. But we do have a special meeting scheduled for April 19th. That would be the first community public hearing as well as budget work session number 1. We then have basically on April 26th, which is one of your regular meeting dates, a second community hearing on the budget. We have the constant yield tax rate hearing since our tax rate will be higher than the constant yield. That is a requirement by state law. We will have budget work session number 2. And then on May 10th, we are scheduled to adopt the budget ordinance. So that's kind of the schedule. Maybe you all can kind of think about the issues that you talked about. And, I think President Pecoraro, since you're the chair of the committee, after you've had an opportunity maybe to reflect on that and talk to your colleagues on the committee, if there's anything in the schedule you would like to change, please just let Lydia and I know that. We can certainly add meetings as you all deem appropriate to make sure that you have the discussion you feel you need.
I would say that I think we should plan on another committee meeting.
Okay.
And based on how we see those 2 committee meetings go, will tell us whether or not we're going to need to schedule more work sessions. I mean, I think that if we do a good job, presenting the budget in a clear way and give everybody all the information they're going to need to look at ahead of time, we ought to be able to move through some key decisions in the work sessions without too much trouble. So I think, we're going to have to have some conversation about how we want to plan that.
Okay. And I think, President Pecoraro, if you're okay with this, I think Lydia and I, as I said, I think, the big hole is obviously the salary piece. Certainly, I think she and I will work probably even tomorrow. I'm sure she's excited to spend another fun-filled day talking to me about the CIP. But I think we should be able to wrap a lot of that up reasonably quickly, probably by early next week, I'm hoping, if we can connect with all the department heads that she needs to connect with. And then I think it's the salary piece. That's probably, I'm hoping there's not that many issues as there were last year. So I think just kind of wrapping up, I'm sure Lydia's been taking notes, probably better notes than I was able to take. But certainly there were some, informational requests that you all made tonight that, Lydia and I will compare notes in the morning and try to certainly kind of tie down some of the loose ends in the CIP so we can actually get to you kind of a document that is balanced and that you have the opportunity to see all the projects that we're proposing for FY22. We talked a little bit already about the additional, that we might want to have an additional committee meeting. Obviously, we will be scheduling a Public Works Committee meeting, and I'll be working with Councilmember Yingling to get that scheduled probably next week. The only other, I guess, just it's more of a confirmation for me, but we had had an email exchange. I had had an email exchange with the committee, and I believe Ms. Colston was also on that, about the Evergreen Solution Studies results. So there were at least 2 of the 3 committee members who weighed in, and when I asked, who was that information presented to, because it's certainly a very material part of the budget itself.
Yeah, I think it's certainly us. I mean,
Okay.
it's a financial decision.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure that is where we are to take it, because obviously.
I mean, look, lots of people are going to have an interest in it, but ultimately it's up to the finance committee, to help decide what's in the budget. So I think, that's that we might as well just do that. And then we can have the discussion with all of our colleagues, during the work session process.
That would be great. And like I say, we will work on getting the Public Works Committee meeting scheduled. And I think I'll touch base with Evergreen again. I'm in a lot of meetings on Friday, but I'll try to touch base. They were just going to run the analysis a different way. If possible, it might be nice to try to wrap up all the other items that are kind of pending, and then maybe we'll get the information on the salary piece to you as soon as possible, because I imagine there'll be a lot of questions, just as there always are, about that part of it. Lydia, did you have anything else before we wrap up?
I don't think so. I think, and unless you guys have any additional data, like she said, data requests or whatnot specific that you need, let me know, but I don't think so. I think.
So let me ask you this. If we were to have another committee meeting, is it helpful to have it prior to that March 26th meeting, or to have it after the March 26th meeting?
It would be, I think it would be helpful. I guess I'm trying to bring up a calendar, but I think from March 26th to April 12th isn't very long.
Can I say, I think it would be a better way to look at it would be helpful to have it after the Public Works Committee meeting.
Right.
Before.
Right.
Well, that'll be hopefully the next week or so.
Yeah, I would like to try to get that scheduled. And like I said, Ben, I'll be in touch with you in the morning, and the members of the committee. I'd like to make sure Jeff is available, obviously, and maybe Steve Strasburg if we want to talk about any facilities things. But I'd like to have them have the opportunity to gather some data. But my preference, if it works out with everyone's schedule, is that we would try to have the Public Works Committee meeting probably the first half of next week. Just so that the more pieces we can lock down, the better. But I do think Lydia raised a really good point. It would be good to have that discussion, so at least those parts of the budget are finalized. At least with the Public Works Committee's recommendation to the Finance Committee.
I am good the first half of next week. I'm going to be somewhere all day Wednesday, but I know we've got a pretty full agenda that Monday.
Yeah.
Well, Ben, if you can get the Public Works Committee meeting sooner rather than later, then maybe we could have a Finance Committee meeting, perhaps at the end of next week.
Right, that should work.
Yeah, that.
Or maybe even on. So the next, we got a council meeting on the 22nd, but my day's pretty open at this point. We could perhaps do it on that Monday if you guys are.
Let me get the Public Works Committee together. Barb, if you want to send out maybe.
Yeah, I'll send out the availability.
Maybe Monday or Tuesday. I mean, Monday we have, I think that the meet and greets and stuff, but I'm flexible. Monday, Tuesday. I'm doing some traveling at the end of next week.
So that would work well for you to get it done sooner rather than later too.
It would. And I don't know, Joe, you're probably pretty good too, I'm sure.
I'm interviewing people throughout the day, Monday and Tuesday, but I still have like a good part of the day that's available. I'll just have to figure out, let's start when that'll be.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I think if both of you, I think Mayor, once you kind of, maybe things get a little bit more solidified, if you want to send me any blocks of time to avoid or that would work better for you next Monday and Tuesday, that would be great.
Okay.
Okay. Well, listen, thank you very much. I know it was a long 2 hours, I think, from my perspective, and I'm sure Lydia's. I think it was very productive, and I
Good.
think we're much further along in the budget process than we were before 7 o'clock this evening. So
Great.
thanks to the three of you for your time. Shannon, thanks as always
Thanks,
for.
Shannon. Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
All right, well, with that, we'll adjourn the meeting.
Bye-bye.
Thanks very much.